My computer audio. Hi, everybody.
Where was that? Yeah, well, that was right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're just gathering in person, so it'll probably be another 5-10 minutes. Okay, just letting everyone know.
Hi.
Hi, Leslie. How are
Hi.
you?
Okay, how are you?
Okay.
I just
Got the
finished
Zoom
work.
working. That's a small miracle. So,
Thank you so much.
still in person, so we'll probably, wait another 5-10 minutes.
Okay, all right.
Okay,
So
just letting everyone know. I'll put that in the chat also.
And
Oh, but I haven't made it fully
Where
public.
is the chat? Okay, where's the chat? Oh, there's the chat. Okay. Hi, everyone.
Susan,
We're just gathering people in person,
I
so it'll
texted it
take
to
a
you.
little
Do you want me to
while.
email it to you or
Yeah.
something? Okay.
yes.
I'm just gonna.
Oh, I see it. Yeah, yeah. If you could just email it to me and then I'll drop it in the chat.
No, I haven't. I've been supposed to, but you missed the time. They had just opened it. Oh, no, man, it's stuck in the traffic, like today, stuck in the traffic. We had been to like that place and back. Some holiday.
Ah. I have to look at this.
hi Barbara.
Okay. It's not what I want. That's not what I want. Okay.
Where are you going, Amy?
I'm just putting something down.
Okay. Amy, what's up? What's new?
Um,
I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's okay.
that's okay. Just what is new? Looking forward to Hanukkah,
Yeah,
the Hanukkah party, and
me too.
work.
It's gonna be great, I think.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Fun.
I feel like my brain is turned totally upside down. So I'm hoping that things are gonna straighten out because I've been doing Hebrew homework. It's driving me absolutely nuts. Okay. So I might not even make sense. I'll try not to talk too much.
Just
might
for
start-
you guys' information, it is being recorded, just for your information.
Okay. Right, I saw that, but then I forgot.
Me too.
That's okay.
All right. Now everybody knows. I'll be back.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay,
got it.
yes, and I'll just bend down. Let's see. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
They're all on mute themselves.
Okay, they say they can hear me. Great, so I will be going in the around. Okay. I think we're still gonna wait a bit, but
Sit here and then you got a sheet.
I think that is this the best, we think this is the best exit for now, right?
Can you see us?
Clarify, this is in English, not yet. I'm just kidding you.
Ich gehe nur
I'm
in Jiddisch
teasing
die
you.
ganze Nacht. Ich weiß nicht, wie du willst. Ich kenne schon keine andere Sprache. Ich kenne dir nicht helfen.
Say it.
Rather than know what you said, right? And
Yeah.
what said, you used to say.
We're home.
I mean,
If
I
you see
think
each
it-
other, used to say the man at least, they used to say, was macht der Jid?
Yeah,
And the answer was, macht ein Leben.
yeah, there you go. Okay, I just like, okay.
Okay. That's all.
You can sit here, you don't all, you can sit here, I don't bite usually.
Yeah, but we wanna watch
You wanna see me, it's okay.
Not,
Yeah.
I'm
Alright,
not
that
afraid
makes
that you
sense.
fight
Watch you,
us.
but talk to you.
Okay,
Fine.
I'm gonna mute, go back to mute. Hi, everyone, we're gonna go back to mute for a bit more until, hi, Barbara. Until everyone, until more people are here.
Barbara's in here, she lives there.
Okay, so let's do this in present tense.
Muted, just bend down.
Yeah.
It's not you.
No, I don't.
Okay, I think that's great. Can you all hear me on Zoom? Amazing. Okay. So I'm gonna do the most anti-Semitic thing anyone could do until everyone chooses to be quiet for a bit. Hi, everyone. Hi. I think about, like, we have all of you in the room. We have at the moment 10 people on Zoom. I think about half the people said they were gonna come, didn't sign up, but I'm happy for each and every one of you that are here, for each and every one of you that are on Zoom. You can still hear me even when I'm not projecting anymore? Okay, great. Should we close it? Should we close the door? Forget that. Before I start, I don't think we'll be able to do it on Zoom. So on Zoom, I want you all to put in your names, where you were from, and this is a question that I'm going to ask everyone in the room as well, but there's no right or wrong answer to it. But I want you to pick a number from 1 to 10, up to you, of how comfortable you feel with Jewish texts.
How comfortable what?
How comfortable do you feel with Jewish text? Jewish texts. It can be a traditional text, like in Hebrew, or it can be like modern texts in English or in any other language. It doesn't matter. But think of a number in your head, and if you feel comfortable, to share that. So put in your name, where you're from, and a number of how comfortable you feel, if you feel comfortable sharing.
What's the most comfortable, 1 or 10?
Oh, sorry, I should have said that. I guess 10 would be the most comfortable. You know, you got, like, let's say you got all 10 commandments. You got one commandment, you got all 10 commandments, and any number in between. So whatever number you think is accurate to you. And I'm not gonna judge you or ask you any questions about that. And I think we'll do the same in the room. I'm gonna start with, I'm Abby. I am the this year's scholar in residence at the new Shul. I am also a rabbi. This is the first time I took any rabbinical position that lasted for more than 1 weekend in the past 11 years. So this is very special to me as well. This is going to be the first class out of 3 over the fall, hopefully more in the spring and the summer, but this is the opening of that. So yeah, comfortable with Jewish texts. I need to answer that.
You say what you mean exactly by comfort.
Okay, good, thank you, yes. What do I mean by comfortable? How about this? How about we define comfortable as you can feel like you can open up a Jewish book, and again, it could be either in Hebrew or in Aramaic or in Yiddish or in English, it doesn't matter, whichever language you feel comfortable, you feel like you can open up a book and you don't have to know what's in there, but you will understand what's going on. You will know what's happening without having to maybe look up everything on Wikipedia, which is also beautiful. But whatever your level, you feel like you can open a book, 1 to 10, 10 being you feel like you can open any Jewish book and you can understand what's going on. You don't have to know what's in there. That's not what I mean. I don't think there's anyone who knows every Jewish text. If there's someone who claims they do, I would like to meet them. But yeah, does that help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was hoping you would say how much pleasure you got from.
How about we do that? Like, we can do that as well. How much do you enjoy opening a Jewish text? That works as well.
Okay.
Listen, what you're gonna get out of hopefully starting today, and even more so over the next few sessions, is that there's no definite way for anything.
Okay.
Everything is up to you. Everything is up to your understanding, to your definition. So yeah, if that, go for it, please. Like, whatever your definition is. I will say, I'm not even gonna say 10. I would say like more like 9. I think there are some books that I would open that I would feel very lost in. Not a lot, but there are some books. Okay, and you also don't have to answer this question. Your name and where you're from and anything else you want to share is more than okay. So hi Susan, what's your name?
Hi, Susan, my name's Susan Myers, and I'm from Queens, Bayside, Queens. And I would say to the first question, 1, but to Susan's question, 9.5.
Love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you, Susan.
So, my name is Susan and I'm currently living in Manhattan, in the Village. And, I would go with the same numbers, Susan.
I love it.
More or less, yeah, I mean, I said after doing the Torah bites for, how long have they been, 2 years?
2 years.
2 years, I went from 1 to 1.5.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's a very big jump.
Yeah.
That means like you went from knowing 10% to knowing 15%. That's
Well, now
That's
that
a-
you put it
that's a
that way.
no, I believe it. Like
Yeah.
I've only known you for a few months, but I believe it.
Mm, okay, well, it's now 10% seems high, but 50, yeah, right, okay, but I'll stay with
I
it.
think everyone who
Yeah.
let's put it this way, anyone who grows up in any Jewish community, but I want to even say that every person who lives in New York City starts at least a 0.5 to begin with,
Right,
just by
okay,
virtue of living in New York City
right,
and so on.
and downtown is the diaspora within New York City.
Hi, I'm Vita. I'm from New York. And it's in my football
My name is Martin. I live in Alphabet City, and I did not grow up Jewish. And I didn't know some Arabic, but I can only say 10 because I love to books. I love to read, and every attention to Jewish text, even if I don't understand it, there's something pleasant about not understanding and wanting to understand. I really feel like that. And the only thing is that I always still, I'm not used to read from the other side. So,
You mean like right to left?
so just that kind of annoying.
Rabbi Abby? Hello?
I just want to repeat one thing that you said because I think that was so beautiful. One thing that really struck me, you were saying, oh yeah, if you don't, like the joy that you get, even if you don't understand something, but the joy of questioning, the joy of learning.
Yeah.
That is the most Jewish thing you can say. Because I would say that the most, when it comes to Jewish education, what we have been doing for 3,000 years hasn't been as much as constantly learning, but constantly questioning and constantly like being like, if you don't understand something, that doesn't mean your knowledge is any less. That's actually a lot more because you have a question. And that is the beginning and the end to, I think, so much of Jewish education and what it means to be Jewish and what it means to study Judaism.
Okay, hi, my name is Jess and I'm also from Alphabet City, and I very much enjoy opening Jewish texts and reading them. I understand more or less sometimes. What does understand mean? Sometimes I can't say it always, sometimes if I'm just looking at Torah portions, it's boring. Until I get some more, information about the context and, the midrash or, but I enjoy learning. So I enjoy digging, and some things are more interesting than others, I find.
We're gonna have one of the texts, if we get to it, will be a lot about that, of like constantly like every new thing that anyone comes up with.
Hi, I'm Audrey, and I have been a born and bred New Yorker. In fact, I was raised right here in the Lower East Side on 11th Street in the FDR, so like just around the corner. And what Susan said is clear. Do we enjoy it? Then it has to be 10. The same with books. I love learning about it. But I'm comfortable with not knowing a lot and just opening it and figuring out what it is. I mean, what do Jewish people do? They study. In fact, in Israel, the Orthodox aren't even working. They're just studying their whole life. So the whole idea is to keep learning, keep learning, keep learning, keep learning, and keep questioning, keep asking. And so I was going to say a 5 to start, but if it's, am I comfortable opening and asking all those questions and studying, then I have to go with Martin and say a 10. Just like, yeah, I love learning more.
I love this. And going off on what you said, if either the next time or one after, depending on how many texts we get to today, there's an opening kind of foundational Kabbalistic text written in the 16th century that starts out with the words Tachlit hayedi'ah sheneda shelo neda, which translates to the ultimate knowledge is knowing that we don't know. And that is the ultimate knowing. I know that's very Jewish and very Kabbalistic, but it's also very true on a human level. Like knowing that you don't know, it's not just that there's nothing wrong with it, it is the ultimate knowledge. Okay. Now I didn't, and everyone online, I'm seeing everything, like I think like going back and forward will be a bit, but Susan is also paying attention to the text, so to the chat. So if there's any questions that come up, so let me actually start with that housekeeping. So I'm gonna make sure we have left with 70 minutes. So I'm gonna make sure to leave some time at the end for questions, like back and forward question Q&A. But even before that, if there's anything that I say that you don't understand, so a clarifying question. Something that isn't, so not like if you understand what's happening, then let's move ahead and then we'll get towards the end, we'll get to more questions. But if there's something, a term, a word, a concept, I wasn't clear enough about something, as some of you know, English is not my first or my second language. So if I say anything you don't understand, do stop me and we'll keep checking on the chat as well. So the same for everyone on Zoom. If there's something I say that you don't understand, put it in the chat, and then towards the end, we'll have time for some questions about whether it's about directly to the text or indirectly to the text. And then we'll also have space for people on Zoom to ask questions directly as well. I think we'll be able to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's get back to the question that I asked you. I didn't ask that just because I'm very curious. I am also very curious. But the reasoning for that was also because a lot of what we're going to go into is also talking about that ultimate question of what does it mean to know, to understand what you want, to understand what is your Judaism, what is your Jewish way. I think today is going to be focused a lot on, let's call it, giving ourselves permission and understand that it's okay to like do that in our own way. And then hopefully over the next 2 sessions, we'll go a bit more into like how that looks and what that means. But ultimately, it boils down to whatever your Judaism is, whether your answer to this was a 0 or your answer was a 10, on any level, you have a space and you have a place. And you don't have to believe me yet. That is going to be the ultimate goal of what we're going to go through over the next 3 sessions of looking at what it means to have a unique Judaism for every generation and for every individual, both as a community, as a whole, and as an individual. So I want to start, so obviously, as you all saw from the title, this is very heavily Hasidic, which is both how I was raised, but also is in my blood. So I wanted the first text, and oh, by the way, what I think we're gonna do, I'm not gonna be talking the whole time. So I like doing popcorn style. So like, instead of like going around, people could just like volunteer to read something. We'll do the same at Zoom, so people on Zoom could also volunteer to read. On Zoom, I will ask, is everyone comfortable raising the hand emoji? Do you know how to do that? Do you all know how to raise your hand on Zoom? There's like at the bottom of your screen, if you click, there's an option to raise your hand. Yes, Brad, I saw your, so yeah. So whenever I ask for volunteers to read, I will look in the room and look over there and we'll pick people to read any part. For people on Zoom, we put the link, Susan put the link in the chat so you can open it up for yourself as well, so you know where we are. When you read, you can read, so almost all the texts are in Hebrew and in English, besides the first one that's in Yiddish and in English. When you do read, you can read in English, you can read in Hebrew, or you can read both, whatever you feel most comfortable. So I'm gonna read the first one also because it's very personal and kind of like see that as an introduction. I'm gonna say it in Yiddish and then also in English. Lass mir fallen, ob ich darf fallen, der was ich will werden, wird mich haben. Let me fall, if I must fall, the one I will become will catch me. That is a quote from the Baal Shem Tov, who is both the founder of the Hasidic movement and also my direct ancestor. And for me, that has personally been something very personal. I open, like, there's a quote that opens my book. They're published in 2019, and it's this exact quote. But I think it's also foundational to what you should think about when you think about Hasidic texts. And I think beyond that, when you think about Judaism and when you think about what it means to be alive, there is nothing wrong with failing. This can, like, to paraphrase this, is there's nothing wrong with failing. The question is what you do with after you failed, after you fell down. You are going to become something different, but that there's nothing wrong with that. That new person can catch you. To get a bit more textual and a bit more for the context of what we're going to see over the next few texts, think of this in context of Judaism. Because if you look on a Jewish text, you look on Judaism and you're like, I'm failing at it. I don't understand what it wants from me. There's no space for me in this. Once you have failed, if you fell, either it's not necessarily failing or you fell, which is also based on a term in Tanakh, a term in the Bible, but we're not going to go into that right now. Whoever you become right now, at any point, that person can catch you. In the context of Judaism, the Jew that you are, or the way you relate to Jewish studies and Jewish texts, that Judaism can at any point catch you. And we'll dive into a bit more, into that a bit more. Does anyone want to read number 2? Very short one, go for it.
I realize that all forms of religion are masks that the divine wears to communicate with us. Behind all religions, there's a reality, and this reality wears whatever clothes it needs to speak to a particular people.
I think that's very important for the world right now, specifically with so much conflict and so much that's going on.
That's right.
But this is also a paraphrase. So this is a quote from Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi. Some of you might have heard of him. If you haven't, I encourage you to look him up. He is considered by many as one of the founders of Jewish Renewal. Wrote a lot of amazing books. This is actually from his last book called The December Project. But his Judaism and his practices were also very heavily influenced by Buddhism and by a lot of other teachings around the world. But one of the things that he would I don't remember the exact original quote, but he would paraphrase it into thinking of every religion, but I would say every culture, every way humanity lives as the sun.
As what?
As the sun. Imagine, as a metaphor, as a parable, imagine the sun. And there's one sun for everyone, and everyone sees the same sun, and everyone's goal is ultimately the same place. And then every religion and every culture is a finger pointing at the sun. But instead of us focusing on where that finger is pointing, we're all focused on the finger. Which color is it? Which shape is it? How thick is it? How thin is it? Where does it go? How is it bent? How does it look? How long do you keep it up? How long do you keep it up? We get so focused on the path instead of focusing on where we're trying to go, which ultimately we're all trying to get to the same place. And I know, for example, the past 2 months, we're not going to get too much into that, but the past 2 months have been really hard for a lot of us. And I'm talking not like I'm half Israeli, so for me personally, but even beyond that, it has been really hard for so many of us. And one of the things that I have been grasping with why it's so hard for people to simply see humanity. The second you stopped focusing on how people look, how people dress, which language they speak, and focus on seeing the sun, seeing the shine, seeing light in every person, it sounds very cheesy. It sounds very lovey-dovey and unrealistic, but I do think it's possible. But that's what we're gonna see and we're gonna dive in. to focus on ultimately, there's a lot of different forms. And in this context, there's a lot of different ways of being Jewish, a lot of different forms of feeling like you're being Jewish. But at the end of the day, it's all about a reality of humanity, a reality of life, and us trying to make sense of that reality. And most importantly, giving ourselves permission to dress up that reality in a way that feels best to us and that feels most accurate to us. Go ahead.
I mean, this example is the finger pointing just here before we came here outside, we were talking about, this time now and all the, misery and tragedy. We're talking about the the Temple Mount. So that sort of people say, oh, that's not people, feel comfortable doing all this time to demand the Temple Mount should be complete Israeli control.
Yeah.
I talked to a friend of mine the other night, and it all happened. It's going on. And he says to me, you have to understand, it's the doom of the work. Every cruelty and murder will committed as long as that is not a complete end of his mouth. So this pointing, but here, this I actually wanted want to come. This thing is so beautiful because he talks about masks, right? And then I think this is, he says it's the divine, a mask that the divine bears to communicate with us.
Yeah.
So it's the divine communicates through us, through our different cultures and beliefs and masks and costumes, right? So not only is it like hindering your own practice and sure, but it's also communicating something divine in that choice, right? When you look at this debate of like dressed and what they do, what they're not doing, now it's just beautiful. They come up with that, it's so practical. And then I like this the same way it says, Richards, there's a reality. And when again it comes to where's the clothes, which movement. But I'm not going to know, but there's a reality. So that it's not that the religious practice is obscuring the reality of justice, but it's reflecting.
It shouldn't, yeah.
Yeah. When we look at
Sorry,
others,
did you want to?
No, I just wanted to, Amy has a really lovely point in the
Okay.
chat, which is just that if more people sat in view of the camera,
Right.
we'd actually all feel like
Or
one
feel
group.
more, okay,
And
so
they could
yeah.
hear
So
us
thank
and
you,
see us.
Amy, and
I
I'm just
wouldn't,
happy
if
to see
anyone
that.
feels comfortable,
It's ridiculous.
Okay.
But it will make us all feel like we're part of it.
Yeah.
if you
Right
want
here.
to, yeah.
Can you
Two,
hear
and,
me, Can
Anyone
you
feel
hear me,
comfortable?
Susan? Susan, can you hear
and
me?
everyone also, from here, if you speak up, you really have to project,
You have to
because
project
otherwise
when
you're
you
not gonna
talk,
hear
yeah.
us. I'm just.
Okay.
Is that good?
You
Better?
sit down a bit down. I think that's better. Okay,
Okay.
Thank you.
yeah. Okay,
I wanna make sure I see everybody. As many people as I can see.
okay,
Is that good?
I think that's good. How do you feel? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
okay, so to your point, we're saying like, it should be, all of those masks should actually be a good thing. And again, like, we'll get to that either the next session or one after that, when we'll touch a bit on some foundations of Kabbalah, some. You want to say?
I'll stay in the tree,
Okay.
just so I can.
We'll get into a bit some of the foundations of like Kabbalah and what it is generally. But a lot of it is to understand how everything in the world, and we are gonna get a tiny bit to that when talking about people specifically, how everything is a part of the divine. How everything is a part of God. And the mask in many capacities is just like a different, so imagine like to talk about the sun again, if you see the sunlight going through a shade or going to a stained glass window, for example, and suddenly the light that you see in the big synagogue is now blue or yellow or whatever color it is, and the light looks different, but in reality it's the same light, it's just wearing a different mask. And that could be very powerful because it could give you the capability to enjoy the light as opposed to staring directly in the sun that can blind you. But the problem that sometimes happens is that we get stuck up on exactly which kind of shade it is. So like every culture and every religion and every practice could, at its core, be a way for you to relate to divine, to relate to light, to relate to whatever it is you're trying to relate to. But when you start controlling it, and you start being like, there's one way of doing it, everyone needs to do it a certain way, that's when we could run into trouble. And we'll see that later specifically, but I will add one other thing before we move on to the next. So some of you might know that in Judaism, there is 613 commandments. That's the number that is given. Kind of not exact, but that's the number given, 613 commandments. The Zohar, which is this 13th century text, kind of the foundational text that Jewish mysticism is based on and later the Hasidic movement is based on, doesn't call it commandments. They call it 613 pieces of advice, or they use an Aramaic word itin, or in Hebrew that would be eitzot. What? Eitzot in Hebrew, which is 613 pieces of advice. So instead of seeing commandments as, here, do that, do that, do that, it's rather, here's a good piece of advice. Maybe if once a week you take a day off, you will feel closer to the light. You will feel closer to God. So instead of seeing it as, you gotta do this, you gotta do this, you start seeing it as, here's a good piece of advice. So as soon as you realize that every person has their own, I think everyone, I don't know if there's any psychologists or social workers in the room, we all know that you can't just be like every human being has to live the exact same life and has to like, there are different pieces of advice for a different person. And every culture has their own. For some, it's a certain kind of clothing. For some, it's a certain kind of holiday and a certain kind of practice. And even everything as mundane as the foods and the things you drink and the kind of houses you build could be your own way of relating to that.
I just
Yeah.
want to say one thing that struck me about the idea of masks and clothing is that you think of masks as a covering, as a containment, but it's an opening, it's an invitation. So it really makes it so fluid and dynamic, much more than shutting it down and covering it up and making it static and rigid. So
That idea is very prevalent also in Hasidic people. I think across Jewish life, but specifically in Hasidic teachings for the context of this class specifically. But yeah, like the best way to reveal sometimes is to hide, or the best way to hide is to reveal, and so on. And it goes both ways.
that's why hide and seek is in every culture.
Exactly. Any comments that we need to address? Or are we good? Okay. Can I get a volunteer for text number 3? Anyone either in the room or on Zoom? First come, first serve. Not I will read it, I warn you.
I'll read. Okay. Do you want me to read the Degel Machane
Yeah.
Ephraim?
Well, you can, that's just the name of the book.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. In every generation, the scholars of that generation are making up alternative translation, or finishing up or filling up the Torah. Because the Torah is being interpreted in every generation according to the needs of that generation and according to the source of their souls. So is God enlightening the eyes of the wise people of that generation in its holy Torah. And whoever denies that the Torah has different and unique interpretations for every generation, is as if they deny the divine's Torah altogether.
You sit with this for a second. Let me say something personal for a second. If you walk into almost any, not just Hasidic, but any Orthodox community today, and you go up to the Bima and you start saying, hey, everyone, every generation has its own unique interpretation. Every generation has its own Torah. Every generation has its own Judaism. You're going to get kicked out very, very fast. Yeah, the reality is, so this text, to give a bit of context of where we are historically here, this is a text called, a book called Degel Machane Ephraim. It's one of the earliest Hasidic texts ever published. This was written by the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the grandson of the founder of the Hasidic movement, that there actually are historical records, like tax records, that place him as living in the same house with his grandfather. So there's one person on the planet, the Baal Shem Tov himself didn't publish it. So everything that we know about him is from his students, and a lot of his students have published a lot of texts, and they are today a lot of volumes of books that compile a lot of his teachings from his students, but he directly never published anything. This is basically as close as you get to someone who literally lived in the same house, someone who really grew up with what it would mean. And there's a lot happening here. First, just to focus on face value, what it's saying is something that might come surprising to some people, specifically people like me who grew up being exposed mostly to a very rigid form of Judaism, but I think to a lot of people, might come as a bit of a surprise that there's similar ideas throughout Judaism, literally starting with the Tanakh, starting with the Torah, all the way down to modern texts, and throughout history, people constantly find this, either directly or indirectly, where the Torah, the Jewish teachings, everything is getting reinterpreted, it's getting repackaged, and it's putting on a different mask according to the needs of a specific generation. But in the early Hasidic teachings, that became one of its core values. An understanding that there is no one size fits all. And I don't want to spend too much time on a history lesson, but the context of the Hasidic movement was also coming out about a century or so after a book called the Shulchan Aruch, which is this Jewish law code published in the 16th century, which is one of the earliest. There has been a bit before, but that was the first one that became fully accepted, which is a book that just has a lot of laws with no explanations whatsoever. Usually it just goes, this is why you do this. It's literally a law. This is how you do, this is how you do, this is how you do. And to this day, the Shulchan Aruch is perceived as the ultimate authority on Jewish law by, not just by Orthodox communities, even by conservative communities and so on.
Do you remember where it was published first?
It was written, the rabbi who wrote it, his
Yeah.
name is Rabbi Yosef Karo.
Yeah.
He lived in Tzfat, actually, which is a whole other interesting period in time, because during the 16th century, there's a very short, about a decade of a period where Tzfat, which was a really small community, Jewish community at the time, the whole, what we would call the land of Israel, had probably 20, 30,000 people at the time. We're talking here at the beginning of the Ottoman control of then Armed Palestine. But the Tzfat Jewish community at that time was less than 1,000 people. And that small, tiny community, mostly living in praying in two synagogues that are still around. If anyone has ever been to Tzfat, you can see that. And around that time changed, that small, tiny community, under a very short period, changed Judaism forever. Every community. It is where the Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria, the father of modern Kabbalah, lived. It's where this guy, by the name of Yosef Karo, who wrote the Jewish law code along with many other books, lived. A guy who is known by the name of Alshich, based on his book, who wrote also a lot of books and a lot of prayers. The whole concept of Kabbalat Shabbat. If you go to synagogue on Friday night, everything that comes before Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbat, everything that comes before just one psalms that is said, everything was added during that time in the 15th century. Lecha Dodi was added during that time. Yedid Nefesh, which is a prayer that we're going to have a small quote from later, was written in that time. A lot of most of the songs from Friday night, or from Shabbat meals and so on. It's a very short period. It's historically a fascinating time where this tiny group of people truly both revive but also transform Judaism in every community to this day. But this is this is where this was published. I think it was first printed. I don't remember if the first printing was either in Turkey or in more like in Eastern Europe, because then there was this guy of Yosef Karo, he mostly wrote the customs and the kind of halacha according to Sephardic Jews. He was Sephardic, his parents were expelled from Spain. And then you also get this rabbi from literally around during the same time, this rabbi who lived in Krakow, known as the Ramah of Moshe Isserles, whose synagogue is still, if any of you have been to the Jewish part in Krakow, it's like that very old synagogue, that's his synagogue. And he also published kind of like the law code plus kind of Ashkenazi customs on top of that, all around the same time. But anyway, so like the context, you can spend the whole night just talking about that. But the context of the Hasidic movement is kind of a twofold. There was a big pogrom that happened at the turn of the 18th century. It was a very big pogrom that destroyed most Jewish communities in and adjacent to the Russian Empire. And then also the communities that were rebuilding became extremely legalistic, really focused on the law, and following everything to the letter of the law and following all halacha and so on. So the Hasidic movement kind of came at that time trying to, in a big way, to push back against that and bring back the spirit, bring back the soul, the meaning, the joy of Judaism and so on. And that's the big part. So this is where this comes in, it's so important. And you can a bit see it in this text where basically they're trying to push back against someone being, hey, there's a book that was written and we have to follow everything according to the book. And these are very traditional Jews. They are in their own way reformers. They are in their own way bringing a form of an enlightenment, bringing a populist movement, but they still very much believe in the authority of every Jewish text. And so on. And they also believed in the authority of Jewish law, halacha. But we're pushing back against there's one way of seeing it. There's one way of being Jewish. There's one way of doing Jewish. And instead being, no, every generation has its own unique way of being Jewish. And then you can see that they are literally talking to people who try to deny it. He says, whoever denies that, using the word in Hebrew, which kofer is the ultimate heretic. Anyone who tries to deny that, you are a heretic. You can see the tension, this wasn't written in a vacuum, but very clearly the movement is trying to come and be there's a new interpretation for every generation. And whatever you find it, or whatever works for that generation, that is what God, that is what the divine, that is what Judaism.
And in the middle is the beautiful term, right? When it says, because the Torah is being interpreted in every generation according to the needs of that generation,
yeah,
and according to the source of their soul.
A little louder.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I said in the middle is this beautiful turn, because the Torah is being interpreted in every generation according to the needs of that generation. And then comes this beautiful sentence, and according to the source of their souls.
Yeah.
To a modern person today, you would understand most of the text, okay? You would say, yeah, like any other text,
Yeah.
textuality, right? But then you put in the middle according to the source of their souls, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is a bit very spiritual and Kabbalistic, yes, but also, and a lot of, this is more something that I'm working a lot with, and I'm writing actually the whole book now that's going to be focused on that. But at least in Kabbalistic and Hasidic teachings, at least I think, and you have every right to disagree with me, but you can replace soul with the modern idea of identity. A soul ultimately is who you are beyond how you look, beyond your physical makeup, beyond your physical body. The soul is something that is you, that isn't tangible. It isn't something you can touch necessarily.
Would you say it's your experience?
Yes, who you are, who you ultimately are internally, beyond where you were born, beyond your race, your gender, your sexuality, beyond something physical, there's your soul. And that's what I'm saying, and I love that you picked up on it also, because this is taking it to go beyond it. It also makes it in a way that you can't really argue with it. You can't be oh no, you are a certain Jew, you need to be a certain way, because they intentionally use the soul, which isn't something you can see and touch.
Yeah.
It is something inside, it is something internal. And that is where your Judaism lies. That is where your needs lie.
In a way, from the way you just described the history, which I had no idea about, that the rigidity came after these huge pogroms.
Yeah.
So you could see it in terms of trauma.
Yes, it definitely was.
That they couldn't feel initially because that's what happens in trauma.
Yeah,
And so this is kind of restoring the capacity almost to feel.
Yeah. there's a concept in the Hasidic text that talk a lot about, which, and again, written in Hebrew, which is mitzvah anashim mulumadat, which translates roughly to you do commandments, you do things like very learned people. Which sounds almost like a good thing, but it's actually a very negative thing, which is someone like you know all the law, you know all the rules, you know exactly how to do it, and you just follow the motions. You follow the laws, you do it like, I think maybe today we would call it like very bureaucratic, like very like you fill out all the forms, you get it all
like
done.
rote.
Yeah, you
Rote,
know,
yeah.
and that is an extremely negative thing. They talk about that as the peak negativity. To give an example of a story, so there's a story of the Baal Shem Tov that one day he was traveling around a lot. The way the Hasidic movement was spreading at the beginning was traveling basically around like the Pale of Settlement, around these like very poor villages, most of them still decimated by these pogroms just 50 years earlier and so on. And there's this story where he walked into a very prestigious synagogue and he says, "Oh, I can't go in. The synagogue is full of prayers." And everyone is like, "Okay, that's a good thing, right? It's full of prayers." And he's like, No. It's full of prayers that haven't left. They're just stuck here. They're not going anywhere.
Wow.
And it was supposed to be a pushback against these people who were doing everything like they did the prayers, they said the exact words, and they said it in the exact order that it was supposed to be said. But there was no intention to it. There was no soul. There was no neshama. There was no soul to it. And it stopped.
No connection.
It didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
It didn't go.
But
So you
both
get
of you were saying that is that whole thing is when it was the rules.
Yeah.
If it's rules, then you don't have to have a soul, you just read it and do it. But once it becomes what you said, as it becomes something that's suggestion, then you have to bring your soul into it to see, do I want the suggestion, don't I want the suggestion? You have to mix with that rule.
Yeah.
To come up with it, so
And
that makes it a huge difference.
exactly. And at its core, if you want to see what is Hasidic Judaism, it's this. It's the soul. And they talk about there are numerous texts like that. And I didn't frame this as an introduction to Hasidic Judaism as a whole, which maybe we'll do one day. But they literally call Hasidic Judaism the neshama, the soul of Judaism, which so much of it is to bring that, remove that rigidity and focus on the internal part, focus on the meaning. And so on.
Which is so interesting to me because I mean, I took courses with Reb Salman.
Yeah.
And so the whole thing, that his whole idea for Newell was to bring the soul back to it. And yet the soul was supposed to be brought back to it where he also began with the Hasidic movement.
Yeah.
But somehow it lost that. And
We're
what you
gonna-
said because of the timing and what it had to do to protect itself. So
Yeah,
Well,
well,
you know,
it's not even to protect, it's partly, but
survival.
what happens just even neurologically in trauma is like, it's just you go into survival mode and you have to and you also have to, I think people have to feel, they can feel. So, but they have to have a way to connect or be part of a larger, so to make it in a very rigid rules that everybody follow, so you know you're part of the same group, because you can't feel the connection.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a longer conversation,
Yeah,
but it's a lot what
sorry,
happened
yeah.
in the modern Hasidic community after the Holocaust as well.
Yeah.
Like with the whole, it didn't start then, and we're gonna see in a minute. You're already gonna see how the Hasidic movement started to lose that already in the fourth generation. We're gonna have a text in a minute that focuses on that. But yeah, originally the Hasidic movement of today has a few leftovers of what Hasidic Judaism really was, and then. I don't know if you ever heard about it, Zalman also used to say that when a movement becomes a movement, it stops moving.
Right.
When you try to codify something, which to be honest, like I was saying, like in defense of Judaism throughout history, it was sometimes the only way to survive. You had to codify, you had to follow very rigid rules, you had to do it, and it was very easy for the soul to get lost. And I just think it's constantly you need, and it's gonna lead in very beautifully to the next text, but you need this constant rebirth, you need this constant renewal. And like I would just read that one myself, and thank you for reading that out because that dives directly in on source number 4, which is just a quote from Martin Buber. who is basically the first person studying Hasidic Judaism from a more academic and like basically a secular point of view. But he said a very beautiful, very powerful statement. Hasidic teachings is the proclamation of rebirth. No renewal of Judaism is possible. It does not bear in itself the elements of Hasidism. Basically, the Hasidic movement was trying to create a rebirth. They didn't, in the Baal Shem Tov said it numerous times, that I have no inventions. Which maybe isn't exactly accurate, but in many ways that is true. When I remember when I was a teenager, one of the books I studied in there is a book that took all basic Hasidic ideas that are at the core Hasidic ideas and showed kind of references in all the Jewish texts, going back to the Talmud, going back to even earlier. We're going to have some of that next week, not 2 weeks, next class, that show kind of like how like so many of those ideas are they're not new necessarily, but they're just like a proclamation of rebirth. Basically taking those ideas and renewing them and focusing on them. And I very much think that I don't want to place ourselves as being like we're at this like paradigm shift, but we very much are. And I think in many ways we need this again. We need a new renewal and a new rebirth of what Judaism means and how we do that. Okay. Are we ready for the next one? Okay. Any volunteers for 5? Do we have a hand over there? Yeah. Anyone? in the room?
Somebody, yeah.
Yeah.
go
Okay.
ahead.
Donnie.
Can
ahead.
you unmute yourself? Okay, amazing. Go for
Yeah,
it.
I don't see any text on this screen. Is it there?
Is it possible to
You
do
have to click on the link.
Yeah. You go with
You have to click on the link in the chat to get to Safaria.
Here, let me
I'm
see.
gonna put the link in too again.
I'm IT
Here, you
challenged.
should probably still have it. Here.
Yeah.
No, go.
Yeah.
Can I do it?
Yeah, please.
By the way, the text in the chat does not have the same text that you are reading. I mean,
Did I put
I
in the
read the
wrong
entire,
one?
I think I see it at the top.
I
Let me
read the
see.
entire
Hold on.
Safaria.
I might have put in the wrong. Give me a second. Let me
It had the first
Let's
reading, but
click
not
on
the
it.
second one.
Right. The rest it had the first one, but nothing else.
That wasn't,
have everything.
I'm at that text and it's the same as what she's read.
Oh, I see why. Okay. The link only has the Hebrew. This should be better. Okay, yeah, the problem was that just the way the link was set up, it only showed the Hebrew text, not the English ones, but this one should be better.
All the events, especially the services and for years of being one there's always arts.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, this should be good, great. So we're gonna be, actually, the numbers are a bit different over here. So here it's gonna be source number 3 in the link that I sent. So the one that's named 3.
Okay,
I don't see any numbers.
are you talking about Kedushat Levi, Exodus
Yes.
Yisro 22?
Yes.
Okay. I'm there.
Okay.
You ready?
Okay. We're gonna have some reading on Zoom.
A basic principle in God's service. We, the Jewish people, believe in 2 Torahs, in the written Torah and in the oral Torah, both given by a single shepherd. The written Torah was given us by Moshe, the divine's faithful servant, in writing etched on the tablets, black fire on white fire. The oral Torah given to Moshe is its interpretation, including everything a well-studied student is ever to discover. This means that the oral Torah given to us essentially follows the interpretation of the tzaddikim, righteous people of the generation. As they interpret the Torah, so it is. This great power has been given us by the Creator out of love for Israel, and all the worlds follow their will in Torah. Thus did the sages say, the Holy One issues a decree, but the tzaddik may nullify it.
I think we need to bend it down again. There's a lot happening in this. So I just want to like point out a few things, and then maybe we can talk a bit about this text specifically. First of all, the quote that they have, Kol Talmid Vasig, which is like everything a well-studied student is ever to discover. I think that came up earlier. I remember who said something that this concept that anything that any student, so this refers specifically to a story in the Talmud, in the Gemara, where Moshe goes up to heaven before he got the Torah, and he sees that God is attaching crowns to the words of the Torah. So if you ever look on a written Torah scroll, a lot of the letters have these like dots and these like points on top of them, and they're called crowns. And Moshe asks God, why do you put on, what's the point of this? And it's telling him that, so God says that in this is already involved all these kind of teachings, and everything that any student till the end of time is ever going to come up with is already included in this. So I always say, like when I do a text studies, and sometimes people will ask, do you really think that that's what that text meant? And my response to that is, if you didn't want people to interpret your text in a different way, don't write a Jewish text. Because that's what Jews have been doing throughout time. We look at something and we find our own interpretation. But what the Talmud says is that that is exactly what God wanted. That is exactly what Judaism is at its core, to find everything any student ever is going to interpret it was already included in this oral Torah given to Moshe on Mount Sinai. It has always been. But then, like specifically the part where he goes, this great power has been given to us. And I think here is where this rabbi specifically, the Kedushat Levi, he was known as someone who, I don't know how to really say this without coming off like a total heretic. You know what? Never mind. Let's be heretic. But he basically very often, I think I mentioned that a bit. Some of you might remember on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. He very much was a big fan of the F you God mode of worship. His avodah, his way of relating to God was very often like, you're not the boss of me, almost, and in a very interesting way. And like it is considered in the Hasidic teachings and in tradition like an ultimate a peak idea of emunah, faith. But at its core, he talks here about this idea how, according to the interpretations, all the worlds, and he's referring to this world and worlds to come above and below, follow the interpretations of any specific generation. And basically what he is saying, that if we interpreted the Torah in a specific way, and hypothetically we were wrong, it doesn't matter. And then he goes, huh? Yeah, and then, and then he goes on with the final thing, where it's literally like God could issue a decree, and then the tzaddik, which are the people he's talking about, the tzaddikim, these righteous people who interpret the Torah, God can say one thing, and they could come and be like, yeah, I have a better idea. And God agrees. That becomes the Judaism. And I think that is also why, like, I think it's so important for sometimes when people try to take other religions and understanding and try to put on Judaism, then I'm like, it's not just that it's a different religion. Your concept of religion doesn't necessarily always apply. And this isn't the only text in the Talmud, like this specific part. There's another, like even more, but it applies directly to law. So there's a story in the Talmud where a lot of rabbis were having a debate on a specific law. It was the law of purity. It doesn't matter what the law was, but it was whether something is pure or impure, whether something is kosher or treif, to use that term. And there was basically this very knowledgeable and very like big rabbi. He was considered very like the top rabbi of the generation, let's call it. And he said one way, but all the other rabbis were disagreeing. So the rabbis were like, you know what? We go according to the majority, and that is now the law. But then they go on to say that there was a voice that came out of heaven, which regardless of what we think about that, what that voice was, that doesn't matter. To them, that was the closest thing to prophecy. That was the closest thing to getting a direct message from God. So there was a voice that came out and said, no, the law, the halacha is according to that other individual rabbi. You know what the Talmud says? The rabbi said, Torah lo bashamayim. It's a verse in Devarim, it's in Deuteronomy, where it says the Torah is not in heaven. So these weren't like heretics in the sense of like they didn't believe God existed, they didn't believe that voice. We're not going to go into the psychological meaning of what that voice was because that's not the point. They believed that they heard a voice from heaven. And then they were like, nope, the Torah is ours, which is very much what we see here. It's ours, and the way we interpreted it, that's how it's going to be. And there's a lot of other references like that in the Talmud as well, where like reality changes to an interpretation. And this is basically, this text is taking it to a whole new level of being intentionally. We have been given this power. We have been given the interpretations. And that is what the Torah really is. The way we understand Judaism, and the way we're gonna before we wrap up, we're gonna get to that a bit later, also like how each individual of us, but the way we see it, the way we are being enlightened, that is the Torah. And if we're wrong, so be it. That becomes the Torah.
So it's a tool for adaptation
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that I should say, because I think that's a bit important, like you see it here, you see the previous ones, they talk about like either the righteous person or the scholars of that generation, or here where you use the term everything that a student, the term is actually Talmid Vatik, which means like a seasoned student. So like, and I think all of these texts are being very careful of like, maybe know a bit before you do it, like understand and like study, and that's extremely important. But once you have studied something to the best of your ability, to the best of your knowledge, and then the way we understand it, that is what the Torah is. And I know, like you read these texts, and we go through all these, and these are the foundational texts of Hasidic Judaism to this day. Like even modern Hasidic movements, and then you look at modern Hasidic movements, and you're like, how does this add up to black and white clothes, no internet, and whatever? And we'll see, and we'll get to that in a minute. But this is at its core about the Hasidic movement. Any questions before I continue, either online or here? Are there any questions on the chat? Okay. Maybe a bit more of it's cut off. People say it's cut off. Thank you. We're good. We're good.
Okay.
Okay. Number 6. Anyone?
Sure, I'll go.
Okay.
Letter from Rebbe Aluzer of Ledcha.
It's Polish. I don't know how to pronounce it either.
Okay.
It's a city of Poland. I've been there, but yeah.
Okay. 4th generation Hasidic leader. I got your letter and I showed it to my father. When he read it, he was shocked and shaken to his core, seeing that such empty and stupid ideas exist in the world. This is what my father said. Whoever asks, should we sing this song or that song? And whatever to recite the Song of Songs at this time or at another time, and other stupid things like that, which are not worthy of being written down.
The writer of this letter, I promise I'm not trying to be super, what's the word, self-centered with these texts, but it's hard to find Hasidic texts I'm not related to. But this is like, this one I read, I've also directly sent the person writing this. I mean, his letters generally, there's a few of them published, and he is very sharp, very intense, very to the point. But the context of this for a second, so his father, this Rebbe Lazar, he was the son of Rebbe Elimelech of Luzhensk, who is called to this day by basically the entire Hasidic movement, he's called the Rebbe of all Rebbes. He is, in terms of time, of generation, he is, I think, the last probably. There's several other after him that are mostly, but he would be the last Hasidic Rebbe that is fully considered, that's called canonical by every Hasidic movement all over the world. Like someone who's really like his book, he wrote a book called Noam Elimelech, which is at the end of the book, this letter of his son is published. It is one of the primary Hasidic texts. It's considered extremely holy, like a custom that my family has and a lot of others is to have like very small versions of that you can't even read, but very small printed, and you put it in the bed of someone who's about to give birth, and then of a child, or like really considered holy in ways that they kind of stopped doing after him. He was the first Hasidic Rebbe in Poland, which later became, and part of the reason why he became known as the Rebbe of all Rebbe's is because Poland became the center of Hasidic Judaism. It started in Ukraine, but then it moved to Poland by the turn of the 19th century, and then like by the beginning of the 20th century, the vast majority of Hasidic people were in Poland. So he became known as the Rebbe of all Rebbe's anyway. But we don't know the letter. He's obviously responding to a letter. We don't have the letter that he's responding to. But from context, this seems to be that someone wrote him a letter basically being like, what are your father's customs? Which songs does he sing? When does he say this prayer? And when you read it, what got me, and I read this first as a teen, was that this is what Hasidic Judaism is today. Every Hasidic movement and every Hasidic sect is based on our Rebbe wears this kind of hat and wears this kind of clothes, and we eat this kind of food and we sing this kind. The differences between movements is almost exclusively which kind of songs they sing, which kind of prayers they say at specific times. And to paraphrase him, and pardon my language, but we're all adults, so here's what I'm going to say. To paraphrase him, he's basically straight up calling this bullshit. Like, literally, he's like, I was shocked that there is so much stupidity in the world. So you can already see how this is starting to happen. Like, you can see how, like, already his father was the third generation, he was the fourth, but his father was the third generation. And someone was obviously already sending him a letter and being like, how do we do, what's our custom? Literally every Hasidic movement today is about customs and about how do we do it and when do we do it and so on.
I love that it says here he was shocked by the stupidity.
Yeah.
I think this is so, when you allow yourself to be shocked by stupidity, you
I wish I could try like the words that he is using, like shaken to his core, like this is usually how I translate it, but the literal Hebrew translation would be like, all of my bones were like shaking.
Yeah.
Like I was just like, yeah, like my ear, what did it say? I should have translated that more directly. He literally uses a word also that means, I say that in Yiddish, I don't know if I believe there's an English equivalent, like the hair of my head stood up. Is that a thing? Do people say that in English?
Yeah.
My hair stood up, yeah. This is what he's saying, like really, there's like literally a few lines that he spends just being like, I'm shocked, this is horrible, this is crazy, this is stupid. Like really, really, but so you can already see it happening, but you see the pushback of being like, he goes on, and I didn't translate the whole letter, but he goes on to say that if you think that that's what Hasidic, what our Judaism is, then you haven't stepped through the door. You don't know what you're doing.
So that they lost their identity from what you said about soul before, or.
To some extent, yes. What he's saying is that
they're lost.
They're not. You're focusing on but this is like a very like hands-on. This is, I would say this letter is a bit less spiritual and a bit more like realistic. Like you have lost touch with what this is supposed to be. It's not about songs. It's not about when you do that and when you do that. And he goes on, and that letter is maybe one day we'll teach more of it, and there's a lot of valuable parts, and it goes into detail, but basically boiling it down to the spirit, boiling it down to the neshama, to the soul, to your connection, to a concept called the veikut, which is a very big deal, and Hasidic Judaism, which means your relationship with the divine. Okay. I want to skip the next one for now. I might come back to it later. It's also something personal. Again, a Hasidic text. We're going to run out of time, and I want to have some time for also some questions. I want to make sure we get to the next few before I do that. The next one would be, it's 8 on the printed out. I believe will be 6 maybe on there, but basically the one that starts with Genesis 1:27. Do you all see that? Okay. So the next 5 texts are kind of gonna be, I'm gonna try to go through them, and I really ask that if you have questions, hold it, please, for just until we go through the next 5 texts, because they're kind of building on each other. So basically what I'm gonna do right now is, this is both kind of like, here's how Hasidic teachings would approach a concept, but also to bring it home to each and every one of us and what that means. And kind of that like build up of at its core, what it means to be a person, what it means to relate to God, what God means, what divinity means, and what it means to relate to God. Okay, so let's try to focus over the next 5. Again, like if there's something that you don't understand, do ask me, but any other questions, let's try to, I want to stay focused so we get, envision the next 5 texts as building blocks. One building on top of the other. Okay. So 8, or Genesis 1:27. Any volunteers?
And God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them.
There's a lot happening in this verse. I don't know if there's any people who are writers in any way or form, but whenever I teach this, I'm like, one of the things that hits me right away is if a 8th grade student would write like this, they would get an F. Because like it goes back and forward between plural and singular. There's also some confusion here. All I'm gonna say, what's important to remember for right now, is that is very intentional to ultimately be like, God, whatever that is, saying that actually, created man, though that man might not be a good translation, the Adam, or the translation humanity might be a better translation,
Yes.
in his own image. And that is the most important thing right now. The Tzelem Elokim, which a lot of us might have heard a lot about, which is very important. Every human being, this isn't just talking about Jews, it's talking about every person is created in the divine image. And it switches back and forward between singular and plural, kind of referring to the divine image as a whole, to every individual, but also to humanity as a whole in a singular way, but also as every individual. Okay, next one, Exodus 17:16.
He said, it means hand upon the throne of the Lord. The Lord will be at war with Amalek throughout the ages.
Very simple text. And what we want to focus on is the commentary on that. So Rashi, which is the basically the ultimate like Jewish commentator on the Torah. But just for context, in the Hebrew, there's no real way to show that in the English, but we'll see that in the commentary. But the words that are both for the word for throne and the word for God are missing letters. Okay, so who wants to go with 10? Rashi on Exodus 17:16-12. Yeah, go for it. Yeah. You can ignore the Hebrew, but the Hebrew are just to point out, but yeah.
Okay. Because the hand is upon the throne of Yah. What is the force of?
Basically, the word for throne, the Hebrew word for throne. Yeah.
Why does it not say as usual?
Because it's missing a letter, so the word for throne is missing a letter.
And the divine name also is divided into half.
Okay.
Is only the half of the tetragrammaton.
Yeah, the full 4-letter name of God, yeah.
The Holy One swears that his name will not be perfect, nor his throne perfect, until the name of Amalek be entirely blotted out.
Okay. A lot happening here as well, but what I want to focus on is that there's something going on. There's something lacking in the world. There's something lacking in humanity. And as a result, there's something lacking in God. God isn't whole. Whatever God is, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is not whole. And the throne, as in like the space of the divine, isn't whole either. There's something very much lacking. Now, I could have added 5 more texts here that would add a bit more and like show you more primary sources what I'm about to explain. But as I suspected, we were going to run out of time. So I didn't put that in. But just to like give you basically of what's happening here also is that there's something lacking in the world. Amalek specifically is used as a general term to refer to enemies, to people in the Hasidic context, specifically used to talk about people who are trying to take away our soul, take away our connection, take away our warmth. Literally, the Talmud calls Amalek that their biggest sin was that they made us cold. They, is there a word to say they made us rigid? They rigidified us, whatever the word would be. Rigidified us, exactly. The sin of Amalek was they rigidified, they removed that capability. But more importantly, as a result of everything that's happening, God isn't whole, the throne isn't whole. There's something here that is lacking. I want to skip the next one, the one that's Yidid Nefesh, and go for a second to 12, or like the one that taught Rabbi Arthur Green, Radical Judaism.
Who's gonna read?
Anyone want to read that? Go for it.
Being, or should we say Yahweh?
Whatever you want to say. Basically, the 4 letters, yeah.
Okay, being or being Yahweh underlies and unifies all that is. There is no ultimate duality here, no God and world, no God, world, and self. Only one being and its many faces. When I refer to God, I mean the inner force of existence itself, that of which one might say being is. I refer to it as the one because it is the single unifying substratum of all that is. Being is one and each person is God's unique image.
Okay. One final text, Yidid Nefesh, the one that's labeled as 11, the one that we skipped a minute ago. Does anyone want to read that? It's labeled as 11. Okay, yeah.
Please be revealed and spread the covering, beloved, upon me, the shelter of your tranquility.
That's a prayer very often sung and very often said as part of the Nefesh, the last final portion. We have time. Before I bring everything home, I think we're starting to see something happening here, but let's do one more check. And that will be the final one for today. The other ones you can read, everyone on their own. But 13, often when people begin. Does anyone want to read that?
I'll read it.
Okay.
Often when people begin conversations and they want to say, our community does Judaism like this, and others say, ours does it like that. Ours is different, and I want to say no. Tamid Echad, always and forever one. This oneness goes through history, and it goes through Kal Yisrael, all the God wrestlers with whom we feel we share. It goes through our connection to other religions too. And the commonality also extends beyond human beings. We share with the birds, we share with the mammals, with the chimpanzees, who have been shown to be able to learn how to speak to each other in American Sign Language, and then pass it on to the next generation. And when I watch the geese and the little goslings down at the lake, they also connect me with the oneness of it all.
It's just an additional kind of like layer to everything.
I like where he says renewal is not Judaism light.
Yeah, that's an essay. That's the name of the essay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's the name of the essay that part is from. But yeah, it's a gist. What did I just do, or at least I'm trying to do, and I hope we'll see how we all feel about it. Every human being is the image of the divine. The divine is missing something. Something is going on. There's this Amalek, but more importantly, God is swearing that I'm not whole, my throne is not whole. There's something really lacking here. When we think about God, we can think of it as being. It's literally one of the literal meanings of Judaism. The name of God means being, existence. There's no duality, there's no separation. Every person is the image of God. The only way for that image is lacking. Why is the divine lacking? Because the image, if a human being is lacking, if a mammal is lacking, if there's something lacking in the world, the name of God, the throne of God isn't whole. When we say reveal yourself, we're talking to God and we're like, supposedly to God, yeah, right? We're saying, reveal yourself. What we're really saying is to each and every one of us. Because the second you realize that everyone is the image of the divine, and the second you realize that God is a word that we can use to understand the sum total of all there is, the substratum of everything there is, as one of the literal meanings of God, of being, we start to understand that when we're saying there's a different interpretation to the Torah, we're not just talking about something that is okay. We're not just talking that the way you understand God, the way you understand God, the way we each understand God, the way we each understand religion, the way we each understand Judaism is something that is okay to lead in. It becomes an obligation. Because you, whatever your understanding of Judaism is, you are a part of God, literally. Because you are both created in the image of the divine, but also you are a part of being. And everyone that's a part of being is a part of the being, capital B. When Hasidic texts are telling us what they understand to be a unique Judaism for every generation, it isn't just because they want to be pragmatic, which is a very good thing also. Because I can talk from experience, but I think a lot of us knows, when you try to force people to live a specific way and they don't relate to it, you might succeed if you're very powerful, but people are gonna hate you. And you're never really gonna succeed. But the second you understand that every person is the image of God, the second you understand that every person, what we call God, it's what I love, because I feel Rabbi Arthur Green, which by the way, he's one, I don't know if this has happened to anyone else, but I know it happens to people sometimes. You read a book and you're like, oh my God, this person writing 100 years ago was just so amazing. And then you look them up and they're like, oh, they're still alive. And for me, Rabbi Arthur Green was one of those people, an amazing person. If any of you ever get a chance to meet him, I encourage you. He was one of the founders of the Hebrew College Rabbinical School in Boston. But generally his books are amazing. Sometimes deep, sometimes intense, like this quote, you see there's a lot happening there. But I think he does the best job of taking that Hasidic idea, this is actually a Hasidic idea, of God being everything. There's a Hasidic saying of that God is everything and God is nothing, which is very interesting because academically that turns into atheism, which is very interesting. And like a lot of early Hasidic masters were accused of being heretics. But at its core, yes, it's heresy and it's believing at the same time, because it's ultimately seeing everyone as what, when we say God, we're referring to the sum total, we're referring to being. And now you understand that that being can be whole unless it reveals itself. Unless you understand that when you open a Jewish text, you open a Torah, regardless of how much of what you are just understood, isn't just you as a person has understood, it's you as a part of the divine being has understood. There's a lot. I know I just like dropped probably a lot, and we literally have 5 minutes left. And we're gonna spend the next 2 sessions building on that. I think the next one is December 19th, is that correct?
December 19th.
And then we have January
9th.
Yeah, so like, we're gonna keep building on this. This is not the end of it. This is barely the beginning. And hopefully more going forward. But yeah, let me have some time for questions. So any questions related or unrelated? Yeah.
So the whole that is in God and the throne is that we're not including everybody. So I mean that, that if we're missing some people, not listening to your opinion and not valuing your opinion.
That's exactly what it
that's
is.
The whole, and then there's the whole in God, because we're all need to be included.
And the next time that we'll bring even more of that, but specifically, as soon as you realize this specific part that God is being, and everything that's part of being, it's also how, like, and a lot of people have done this work, but a lot of focus on like climate change, for example, and like the environment as a big part of, not just as something that is, well, we're all gonna die if we don't take care of this, but also it is a spiritual obligation. Because being, you can't relate to the divine, you can't relate to God, and I would say you can't relate to Judaism, which ultimately are these like pieces of advice on how to relate to the divine if being isn't whole.
Does it also relate to, I mean, perfectionism or lack and the inability to ever achieve perfectionism? But it, in some ways, you know, it starts with what might have been in my head a heretical idea of that God isn't perfect.
Yeah.
But if we are in the image of God and we as human beings can't possibly be perfect, then accepting that God is not perfect is very freeing and allows us to connect in a very different way. And
one of my favorite quotes, there's a religious scholar that I really like. There's like a handful of authors alive today who I've read every book they've written. And she's one of them. Her name's Karen Armstrong. She's very academic, so it's not very spiritual, but do you know who she is?
Yeah, we read a book, the History of God.
History of God. So do you remember the first line of A History of God?
I don't remember, but the whole concept is about struggling
Yeah.
with the idea of God. It's not knowing.
But that's
What
what I
that
was gonna
is.
quote, because her book opened, The History of God, opens with, in the beginning, human beings created God in their image.
Right, sure.
Which is true, and I tell that to people a lot when we talk about, because my journey out of the community I came from was with a very like academic and like what I taught logical, kind of rejection of religion and theism generally of God. And like a big part of that was being like, whether or not you can prove God existence doesn't matter, but we can prove that human beings created it. Like you can see the evolution of our concept of God from polytheism to like monotheism and so on. Like this like you can see that it's human. But when you start looking here, you were like, yes, and that's beautiful, because God, and specifically the four-letter word used in Judaism, Yud Hey Vav Hey, one of its literal meanings is Havaya, and then Kabbalistic Hasidic texts really talk about God as a concept of Hayah Hoveh V'Yiyeh, the one who was, the one who is, and the one who will be. It is basically a word that we use to talk about being, to talk about existence, talk about the sum total of all there is, which is so much of Kabbalistic and Hasidic Judaism. And yes, unless the sum total of all there is perfect, God isn't perfect, and we aren't perfect. And important for this specific conversation, like this is like, I would say, and I'm not saying it's the only way of seeing it, but at least for me, this explains the earlier text that we saw at the beginning of this class. Like this explains when you talk about interpretation, because if you believe in the very like rigid idea of God, of like a very specific creature, or the dualistic version, this like God that's separated from humanity, coming and telling us something, then like what do you mean you can do your own interpretations? Like what did that God mean? But the second you start seeing God as a way for us to relate to all there is, I don't know if any of you know this song, "You Are the Source of Life for All There Is," like a camp song. It's like, yeah. Anyway, but yeah.
But she also said like doubt is a critical component of belief.
Yeah. She is great. I love it. Like she approaches it from, I do think she has a lot of.
The question is an act of faith.
Yeah, yes, yeah. I don't think she sees herself in any way as spiritual. Like I think she sees herself as an academic, but she has a lot of spiritual statements. I mean, one of her latest books is called the Art of Scripture. It's also fascinating. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I was joking around before and telling Morton. So basically the new shul is Hasidic.
Yeah, I think we all agree.
Yeah, but it's funny because years ago with Niles Goldstein, he was actually a scholar of early Hasidism.
Yeah.
And that kind of the first time I had a new shul experience was when he said it was Rosh Hashanah, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, and we were talking about what constitutes an open heart.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about all the early Rebbes that
Yeah.
you're talking about. And then we had a book group and we read Karen Armstrong.
I mean, Rabbi Misha literally spelled the whole Rosh Hashanah talking about a story from Rabbi Nachman, like you,
That's
who
right.
was also the great,
That's right.
Rabbi Nachman, but he was also a great grandson of the Baal Shem Tov.
Yeah, well, the thing, and I think the original mission statement of the new shul is seeking something old that is new or something. Yeah.
But that is what the Hasidic movement tried to do, and like,
Right.
here's the thing, like, I tell.
What's that?
To make
Ancient.
the ancient.
The ancient
ancient
new, and that is the most ancient you can do. I also like, some of the things I love to tell people is the most Jewish thing you can do is come up with the most non-Jewish thing to do. And that is the most Jewish thing you can do.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you can think
It's
of it.
The Hebrew word dafka.
Yeah, exactly, like, exactly. We have- I was gonna say, like, when in Yiddish we even have a saying for that. It's kind of like, when you wanna say something is so bad that it's actually good, we would say, there's a lot of context to this, to the concept of word goy, which I'm not gonna say, but just like in Yiddish, we would say, even a goy wouldn't do that. So kind of like being like, being like, it is so bad, but only a Jew would be so bad. And like, and therefore it's good. Well, I'm talking in a spiritual way.
Yeah.
Like, I think I mentioned that story on Yom Kippur, like the first Yom Kippur after I left, when I went to like a camping trip and like did a whole menu out of pork and like, I don't
Yeah,
remember
you were
the-
talking about it,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, which is like, that's the most Jewish thing you can do because someone who doesn't care about you isn't gonna, like, what's your point? So like, if you intentionally want to go and eat pork on Yom Kippur, and this is not the point, but like beyond the point is like, that is extremely Jewish. I think we have a hand over there, so I want to make sure we get that, and then I think we're out of time. I can hang
I
you
was just resting my hand on my head. No.
No, we have an
Oh.
yes, go for it.
So I'm back on God being incomplete and Amalek and on interpretation and how they relate. So this is kind of a question and kind of a statement, but I wanted you to comment on it. So if you mean by our being in the image of God, not just our soul being in the image of God, but also our personalities or who we think we are, such as gender. Is in the image of God, and Amalek rigidifies us, and then our interpretations are rigid. Then something like transphobia is actually Amalek, and it's actually like an improper understanding of us being made in the image of God. Yes, maybe.
Yeah. No, definitely yes. It's literally, as I mentioned before, like and my big focus, this is probably one of my tech studies that is the least focus on gender than most of my tech studies are. And we'll have like on the third class, which will be on January 9th, we'll focus even more on that. But 100%, like when you try like that rigidity both on gender, but also we'll see even more, like you might have realized a bit with the text in Genesis and the parts that I highlighted, where there's like this innate contradiction in the verse between singular and plural. There's another text we'll maybe have on the last class as well, this midrash that says that the first person created was androgynous and so on. But there definitely is this idea, and also to simply go with Maimonides, for example, Maimonides is this 11th century Jewish philosopher, he says that gender in God is heresy. It says putting the God as either male or female is heresy. So ultimately putting any kind of rigidity, any kind of like, you have to be a specific way, specifically if that part is, to use a metaphor that's quite real, like we saw that like reveal yourself. If you're putting a rigidity on someone that is going to put them in the closet, literally or metaphorically, you are concealing a part of God. You're concealing a part of their divinity. They're not gonna, and it's a whole other. I have one of the, for those of you who have the link, you will see it and I will send it, we'll share it with everyone as well. But if you check out on Safaria, some of my other source sheets, one of them is titled Coming Out of the Spiritual Obligation, which is focused on this idea of like you being fully who you are is bringing a wholeness to the divine because you are God. So if you are not whole, God is not whole. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you very much for bringing that up. I think we're gonna wrap up the official part. I can hang around a bit, but wrap up the official part. Hopefully we'll see some of you and maybe more of you. So like the next, you don't have to have been here to be at the next one. So if you know anyone who might want to come, they can always still come. But the next one will in many ways be building off of this. And again, like I will share the link and we'll hopefully tomorrow send an email to everyone who signed up with like these texts online as well. And like the last one, by the way, just the last text that's in there is another text by Art Green that could be very interesting for some. If we don't have it, it's just in English and we can read it, but it's also very interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Cool. Thank you.
I just had to think about the story, the girl is 13 years old and she runs to the rabbi and she said to the rabbi, I cannot be bar mitzvah. And the rabbi says, why, my dear? And she says, I don't believe in God. And the rabbi says, you think she cares?
Really, I love that.
Love it.
Sorry, also I told the Hasidic rabbi, someone comes to him and like, I don't believe in God, and the rabbi's like, oh, which God don't you believe? I'm like, God wants me to do this and this and this, and the God is gonna punish me. The rabbi's like, okay, it's okay, I don't believe in that God either. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys.
We need to bring this back.
Good night.
No, it's gonna be a different one. This is part one. There's gonna be a different, no, please take it
Good
if you wanna
night.
take it. And again, like we'll send a link as well.